I'm Katie Cowan, and this is the Creative Boom Podcast. Our next guest is Meredith Schomburg, a Brooklyn-based illustrator originally from North Carolina. Thanks for joining us, Meredith.
Good to be here.
I'm really interested with your story so far because you have done something that actually quite a few creatives are thinking about doing, or are starting to go through the process of doing, in that you're changing careers, but you're not going too far. You are going from graphic designer to full-on illustrator. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. I actually have a degree in graphic design, did that for like 5+ years, and in the past year I've actually made the jump into full-time freelance as an illustrator.
Wow, that's amazing. And how on earth did you decide that you were going to make the switch after having, because you were working for Koto, Airbnb, IDEO?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting when I actually think about the journey of going to school for graphic design, having this kind of career, building that experience, and then just kind of not completely ditching that, but just going straight into illustration. And I think part of it is that illustration has always been something I've done in the background since I was a kid. I am really fortunate that my parents actually encouraged just any artistic creative endeavor that I wanted to do as a kid. And so my dad actually bought me Photoshop in middle school, and so I messed around with digital illustration and really loved it. And it was just a fun kind of expressive thing as a kid. But then I had a really practical art teacher that was basically don't be an artist, you won't make any money. You should look into graphic design because that's a lucrative creative career. It's easier to get your foot in the door somewhere. And because for me it was more about I just want to do something creative. I wasn't dead set on illustration necessarily from the get-go. It was just more I want to do something creative with my career, whatever that looks like. And I found so much inspiring about graphic design and typography and visual communication that I just was yeah, sure, that makes sense. I'll just pursue that. So I went to school for graphic design. I did an internship at IDEO as a communication designer. I loved kind of the dynamic of a creative studio. I moved to San Francisco. I worked as a product designer on their team for 2.5 years. But then it was just such a serendipitous moment because actually the second week at my job at Airbnb, I was sat in the room with the guys that started Koto working on the Trips launch. And I've found that just so much of my move around and even just opportunities that have been opened for me is about building relationships first and foremost. And so, a couple of years down the road when Koto opened up their LA studio, I remember being seeing what the guys were working on when I would be working on at Airbnb, being that's what I actually want to be doing. I want to be doing the branding and the visual communication and all of that stuff. Less oh, if you press this button, this is where it leads you into the app. So there's just so much more of a narrative story going on there. So when they opened up their LA studio, approached them about coming and joining them there. I really actually wanted to move to London, but they were oh, the studio's actually full and we really need Americans to fill the LA studio. Right. And I loved the team that was down there, so it just felt like a really easy move. And then, so I moved to LA a year before the pandemic hit, was just getting settled into that, loved all the stuff that I got to work on there. And then the pandemic hit and we were all working from home.
Yeah, that was fun.
I was always doing some form of illustration personally on the side or for projects because that was always this skill set that I had that I loved using. But just never was oh, I could make this full time. It just felt like this hobby that was fun to do that served a skill for a project here or there, but not necessarily something that I could do full time.
Right.
So then,
because hobbies aren't something that you could ever make money from, are they? You can't be enjoying yourself when you're making money.
Yeah, why would you want the thing that keeps the lights on to actually be something you enjoy when you spend so much of your time doing it? But yeah, so basically when the pandemic hit, we were all working from home. It was my life in LA looked nothing like what I kind of anticipated when that hit. And I lived by myself as well. And so basically, full transparency, a month in, I just had this massive depressive stint where I just would try and sit at my desk, would burst into tears, was I don't know, I'm leading this project. I have people that are responsible to me, and I just creatively cannot show up. And just was dealing with the tension of that. And I remember just having a really candid conversation with my creative director of just like the reality of mentally where I was at. And he was so kind and was just basically like, look, you're a human first. If you need to take time off, go take like a few weeks off. Like, this job is still here for you. And that was just like this moment where I was like, okay, cool. I need to just like take a step back from like this work that I've been doing nonstop. And what happened was, during those like few weeks, it unlocked this like space for me to actually just like draw for the heck of it. And like random freelance projects would pop into my inbox, and it was actually for like a decent amount of money that I was able to basically caveat what I didn't make taking this time of leave off through just illustration. That there was this light bulb moment of like, wait, so like I actually could make this work. It wasn't like there were these massive projects where I was all of a sudden making like, you know, tons of money, but it was just like, it was enough to show me like, oh, this isn't just like coffee money on the side. Like, this is actually like, if I invested in this, I could actually turn this into a personal business.
Right.
Which was just like this cool, and it showed me too of like, oh, I can like invest the time into a project that I want to. It's not me like working late at night on this side gig. It's actually like daylight hours. I can invest as much time in this as I want to. If I need to take a break to go actually like recharge and be inspired for something, I can go do that. And it's less of the like, I'm showing up to this 9-to-5 job because that's what's expected of me. Because I think anytime you try and force creativity into a specific timeline, it's just never gonna, you can get it done, but I think there's just so much authenticity that comes from giving projects and work the time it actually needs to breathe.
Absolutely.
But it was like this motivation of like, oh, now I really want to figure out how to make this work. Like, I genuinely want to do this, even if it's like a bit of a struggle to get started. Like, I think I owe it to myself to actually give this a shot and believe all of the people that have like championed me in the past saying that I could do it. Because I think I just like wrote it off because of like also my upbringing, saying that it was really important to just have like stable income, know where your next paycheck is coming from. But I think I just had like kind of dismissed this other opportunity of freelance because I was afraid. And I think anytime you're doing something purely out of fear, that's not a good motivator either.
Gosh, it sounds like it's now you've figured out finally what it is that you really are passionate about and you want to do. Mm-hmm. Whereas before you've just kind of been tiptoeing around and by all means been successful and had these great jobs. But this is the first time perhaps that you've really thought, okay, I know what the goal is. I've just got to work backwards and get, figure out the steps to get there.
Yeah. And I think that's just like such a huge motivating factor when I'm like, oh, I'm not doing this because like it's necessarily what's expected of me. I'm doing it because I genuinely really love doing this. Like, I love getting lost in hours trying to work out an illustration, like composition, because it's just like this visual puzzle that I get lost in. And it's like so much fun. I really want to do this, but I also don't want to just like be the quote unquote starving artist where like I can't live life well because I want to do this necessarily. So I started basically like setting aside a reserve fund. Like, any freelance opportunity that came my way while I was working full time, I just set it aside and said, this is going to go towards like me going full time freelance so that I can at least have like some space to just enjoy life and enjoy like this new adventure whenever that comes about.
And how long did that take? How long did it take for you to think, okay, I've got enough in the battle, the battle chest?
Not as long as I thought it would. Because, I mean, I was really fortunate that my time at Airbnb meant that, like, when they went public, I actually had, like, some stock options that I was able to sell and set that aside. And then the work that I'd been doing, like, freelance, kind of added up into this nice, like, okay, cool. We would have a few months where, like, if nothing came through, we'd be okay.
It's one of those things you can try and tell people how to do it. You can give them a few pointers, but it's you kind of need to be in the middle of it, and you've just got to do it to learn the ropes. Because you're based in America still, aren't you? And
yes.
So the tax system there and the kind of different red tape, the bureaucracy, the kind
taxes.
Of things. The things you have to set up, that's not really something you can teach because it's changing all the time as well in little kind of bits. You really do need to get an expert in, don't you? And find a good accountant and
oh my gosh, yeah,
all these grown-up things.
It's very much like building the plane as you're flying it, sort of. like metaphor, and I like you said the taxes thing, that makes me laugh because I literally got hit with my first like freelance tax bill, and I had actually been setting stuff aside, and it was still so much more than I was expecting, that it led to like me and some of my like freelance friends in New York just like sitting in a coffee shop and being like, right, we've all been experiencing this, how can we like share like what we've learned, so that like, yeah, so one, that we don't like feel like we're in this by ourselves. So I think like anytime you're going freelance or you're trying to figure out the ropes, just like find other people that are doing it.
Yes.
And like be open when people ask you questions, because I don't think we should like gatekeep the creative community. I think we're all just trying to do stuff that we really enjoy. And there's practical things like taxes and like contracts and all of that stuff that comes into play that we're all figuring out. And so I've just been really fortunate that anytime I've like reached out to some other people that I really admire what they're doing, they've been kind enough to give me a peek behind how they do things. Mm-hmm. That like anytime people ask me that, I want to like try and share as much as I can.
Yeah, you give back, don't you? You keep passing the kind of baton, and you say to people, you know, if you need to like ask me anything, ask me, because I've done it, and you're going to go through it now too, and it's not going to be easy, but you'll get there. Yeah. I mean, how many kind of, you know, how long has it been since you've become a freelancer?
It's actually been a little over a year now. So
Great.
September of 2021, I quit my job and went freelance and moved to New York all in one go. So there was like a lot of learning.
Yeah, exactly. So your parents, they aren't creative?
I mean, I think like saying that someone isn't creative is like an interesting statement, but their career
in terms of what they do professionally.
Yeah. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad is a software engineer.
Right.
So I think like, and he actually builds furniture, so he has like a creative like bent to himself, but it wasn't necessarily like, he had more of the engineer mindset and like the technical understanding, that he would see kind of stuff like Photoshop and like drawing tablets and all of that would be in like the Apple store in our town, and be like, oh, that's cool. Like that was our like point of connection. So like he didn't necessarily understood like the artsy drawing side of me, but he could like understand the programs because that was like his world. And that was kind of like some of that space that I started to play in as a kid.
I bet they're really proud of you for going, you know, embracing illustration and going freelance. But was there a moment when they were a bit worried for you?
I think they were honestly worried when I decided to move across the country. But no, I think it's been, originally, I think my dad was very much like, like, don't do an unpaid internship. Don't like do a thing that's not like a full-time job that doesn't have like XYZ and their benefits. Because of just like, even just family upbringing of like what he had to work through to get to where he is and like have like stability for our family growing up, that I totally understand where that was coming from. But now that I'm like in it, and they've seen kind of like the hard work that's gone into it, the projects that I've gotten to work on, just like the genuine joy it brings me to like get to do all of these things, I think they're just like, yeah, sick, like you're making it work. It's always like really
very proud. I'm 44. I still ring or text my parents and tell them what I'm up to. I'm like, look, Mum and Dad, look what I did.
Yeah, it's really cute.
They have no idea what I do. My dad told me the other day, he said, somebody asked me what you do for a living, Katie, and I was like, I have no idea. And coming from a small town, would you say that like, and I'm just sort of relating here because I grew up in a small town. Have you felt that you've really had to work to find out who you are, to create an identity for yourself?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think even just like my point of view as an illustrator, because I also grew up in like a really like conservative family environment. Right. And so even just like oh gosh, this is such a niche thing, but I remember like I went to this like really conservative private school, that so much so that like my art teacher painted bathing suits on all of the naked paintings because like that wasn't appropriate. And so there's actually like so much to be celebrated, that I drew a lot of that to kind of get out of my system this overarching narrative that had been fed to me, that there was like something to hide about like my body or the expression of like the human body in art specifically. And you look at my work now and that's like a lot of what it is. But it was like kind of having to play and almost like lean into, am I allowed to draw these things? Like, I feel like I grew up in this space where that actually wasn't allowed, but it's really fun and interesting. There's actually nothing wrong with the human form. That and again, like, I love my dad so much and all that he's invested in me, but I remember sending him my like website one time after I'd updated it, and rather than seeing all of the like interesting things that I had drawn, he's like, oh, there's a lot of like naked ladies on this, isn't there?
You just noticed that first.
Yeah, I was like, cool. So that's what you got out of that.
I can see that you have got a very distinct style. I know you creatives hate the word style because it is like something that's always changing and always evolving. But did you find it exciting when you suddenly thought, okay, so I'm no longer this, I'm now this, i.e. an illustrator. Mm-hmm. Did you find that exciting, or was it a bit daunting to sort of figure out?
I think there's this phase where I was playing with illustration when I was still kind of in those like full-time roles at like Airbnb or Koto, where I almost didn't want to be boxed in by a specific style. I wanted to like be able to play with all sorts of different things, which is a lot of what I love about graphic design. Is you get to, especially from a branding perspective, you get to play with a bunch of different subject matter and like visual applications, and it's just like everything is shifting and changing. But there's this moment in illustration that sometimes you have to like lock into a specific style to feel like relevant, or like you can build a business around it. And so for a lot of times I kind of wanted to rebel against that and be like, oh, I'm not the illustrator, I don't have a specific style. But then there was this moment where I kind of had this idea. I actually remember this really distinct moment where it was during like kind of the work from home era. I was like watching something random. I drew this like portrait series of that just like had this idea in my head, and I remember drawing it and being like, oh, this is how I like to draw people. Like, this was actually really fun, and like I want to keep replicating this style. There's like an interesting way to draw hands and like facial expressions that actually became like, rather than trying to copy a style that didn't feel quite fluid, it was kind of like I finally found my voice as an illustrator. Like, I finally figured out, oh, I love to draw hands this way. I love to use these colors. I like when there's like this amount of like graphic contrast in the things that I'm drawing. And if like something's really stiff, I don't like drawing like stiff, rigid things. I love them to be like really organic and fluid and like fill up the space. But then there was this shift of like, oh, now I actually have a point of view. Now I know my voice is in this space. And so I can like keep building on that in a way that's not like, oh, I'm stuck and I always have to draw it this way, but it's like this point of reference that I can like move from that.
That's brilliant. So you found your voice, you found your passion, you've been freelancing for a year. How have you made it work? Because I think we often talk about these, journeys, these paths to success, but there'll be probably lots of people who are trying to make it, into illustration and do exactly what you've done. Mm-hmm. How have you made it work apart from working really hard?
Always invest in the relationships that you're currently in. One, because it's just fun when you're making friends with like the people that you work with, because we're human beings and I think we're communal by nature. So just like generally embracing and loving like the people across the table from you. Because then quite practically, when you like are friends with people, you love working with your friends. And so that's just opened up so many doors for me. Like I even think when I actually moved to New York, I got coffee with this guy that I'd met from this event. It was super random, but he just invited me back to their studio space to just like meet the team. And really randomly was like, I had talked about how I wanted to paint more murals. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, we have this blank wall in the studio. Do you want to paint a mural there? I was like, yeah, sick, cool. And that just happened from like saying yes to walking into the studio and like meeting the team. And then through that, even he ended up messaging me later and being like, oh, one of our clients that we just rebranded like is asking about an illustrator. Would you like to be like put in the mix for that? So I think it's just like naturally looking for opportunities to meet new people that are doing things that you find really interesting. That helps just like open a lot of those doors. So that's definitely one way I've made it work, so to speak, is just like, relationships. And I think too, just like having a lot of like patience and grace for yourself in a process, because I am kind of like that type A first kid role of just like high achiever, get really frustrated with myself if I like quote unquote fail at something. But just realizing that anytime you do something for the first time, there's just going to be some like wiggle room where it's not going to go well. And rather than being like upset about something, just being like, cool, this is a really sick story for next time.
Yeah, definitely. And also, it goes without saying, having a lot of natural talent in the first place always helps.
Yeah, there is that. It's like, it's that hard space of just like, yeah, you do have to like actually be good at it too.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes practice. I mean, you'll have been practicing your whole life. You kind of probably knew deep down that you were going to one day use your art in your profession. It just took you a little bit longer to get there.
Oh, for sure. I even think, though, to what you're just saying about like practicing and doing it, I will say like there's that tension of like you do have to have like talent and an interesting point of view that you're bringing to your art that actually like captivates people and draws them in. But I would also say, like, as an encouragement to people that are still trying to figure that out, like, I look back on the way that I drew hands 5 years ago and it's horrific to me. Like, I have these little like club vector blobs that I thought were passable as hands, and I kind of avoided them because I found them really difficult to draw. And it just was honestly by doing it over and over and over again and like really just finessing like what I liked or didn't like about like a hand form, that now they're like my favorite thing to draw. Because I've also had, I'm learning right now the tension between, like, a lot of tech clients want vector work, which is really, like, clinical and, like, digital. But the way that I like to draw has texture and, like, warmth to it. Because I'll do everything kind of with, like, Photoshop brushes. And I'm actually trying to learn right now how to articulate to clients, like, actually, I think there's something that's lost when you have to have it in vector, because it's really cold and you can't get like that human drawn element that you get from how I usually like to draw things. And sometimes, and I think I'm learning how to like articulate that now versus I think in the past I'd just be like, oh, that's the file format you need, versus actually trying to think, how can I critically articulate this so that the integrity of how I like to draw and create isn't lost in the midst of this.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. It's great that you're figuring it all out. And it's lovely, isn't it? The whole process of, every day, every week feels like a step closer to where you want to be. And you just never run out of ways to improve and to learn and to grow. I love it. I love the creative careers that we have. It just never stops being interesting. And you are actually at your agent now in London.
Yeah.
Jelly.
Yeah.
Was that a new thing? How long have you been signed up with them for?
I think officially like a month and a half now. So, which that was just like a really fun experience, because I've like worked with an agent in the past, but like it was more like a pretty stacked roster, so it was less about like that relationship and more just kind of like getting an experience of what does it look like to be represented when I was just kind of starting out. But I think the Jelly team has been amazing, because when they reached out, I kind of like had that moment where you're like half awake checking emails in bed being like, oh wait, like they're actually legit, because they represent some of the artists that I've like followed for years and like really love and admire. So
they approached you, they came to you.
Yeah.
Ooh, that must have been validation.
Oh yeah, I kind of like did the walk around my apartment being like, okay, I think this might work, I think we might be able to do this, because I definitely sent my portfolio to other agencies and just like heard nothing back. So I think it's just like, I think just because you don't hear from like some people doesn't mean that there's not like opportunity elsewhere.
So you're in London right now. You're finding yourself in this really happy place. Is that about right? How you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the last couple of weeks I've been here visiting some friends, hanging out with the Jelly team. Some of my favorite people from like SF, LA, and New York have actually all been in town for various reasons, and it's just kind of one of those moments where you're like, oh, I'm doing the thing that I am most excited about, and it's just like allowed me this really beautiful life where I get to spend time in like different cities with really inspiring, lovely people, and just having a lot of fun. Like, it just kind of doesn't feel real, if I'm completely honest, that this is how I get to do life. And I just never want to take that for granted.
The things we all learnt during lockdowns and various things that have happened over the years. Have you remembered that, or has life got busy again?
Oh yeah, I think as much as we'd like to think that time taught us to slow down more, I think it's so easy to be caught back up in like the scurry and the more of everything, and especially like what I'm having to learn even for myself with freelance is because it's not this steady flow of work. It's like over the summer I had like 3 months where I basically had nothing, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to do this. And then a ton of work came in. I signed with Jelly. Like now it's kind of like, well, okay, I need to like take a breather. And I think it's just like stopping and remembering like the work will come, like to what happened like when all of this started, just like remembering I'm a human first. And that,
Yes.
like, if I'm just rushing and producing and creating, and like it's more from a like I have to produce this amount of work standpoint versus remembering like this is a gift that I get to do the thing that I love daily. I'm just always trying to like remind myself that if I'm working on something and it feels more stressful than life-giving, just like taking a pause and being like, cool, what's the motivating factor behind how I'm doing this right now? And does it need to shift? Do I need to slow down? Do I need to intentionally like say no to something and just trust that like everything will like settle and work itself out? I don't need to just like work from a scarcity mindset.
And like you say, it's really important to just remember that the work will come. Just have faith. And during those quiet moments, there's so many things we can do, aren't there? You know, marketing, we can improve our portfolio, we can maybe practice drawing those pesky hands.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, to your point, I do always want to acknowledge that like it is such a place of privilege to be able to say that I can like take some time off because work is going well. I never want to take that for granted. But I think to that point is I'm always trying to balance. If I'm doing like a lot of digital work, I'll try and make time to like paint or do something more analog, or like even just cook. Like I love cooking as like a creative outlet that has absolutely nothing to do with illustration. I think it's finding those balances to just like make sure that you're not just like depleting yourself creatively in like one funnel. Because then it just like, if you're just doing the same thing over and over again, it can like kind of lose its joy.
It really can. And you're not somebody who gets anxious about things going wrong, or are you very kind of optimistic?
Ooh. Anxiety is definitely something that I do have to like deal with and manage. I think it's actually been like a journey of that freelance has really like shown a light on, and just like how to combat anxiety when it's like things could go wrong, things do go wrong, and I've definitely had like moments in freelance where I remember when I signed the lease to my apartment in New York, where I was basically like, cool, so we have money in our bank account now, are we going to be able to afford this in a year? But then just realizing that like all I can do is take it like day at a time, do like live well and intentionally with the things that are like given to me each day. And stressing about something that's like 5 months in the future just isn't gonna like change anything. And that at the end of the day, like I've had to go through that mental exercise of like, what's the worst case scenario? Worst case is that I don't have any money and I have to move out of my apartment, but I have an incredible community and friends and like people that love me, that actually like worst case scenario would just mean like more just a knock to my pride and figuring out a new way of living, but it actually wouldn't be the worst case. And I think that's actually like a really good way to combat anxiety in terms of like freelance and career, is like letting yourself go to the worst case scenario and realizing it might not actually be that bad.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It does make 100% sense. And the last couple of years I feel like has helped a lot of us become a lot stronger and mentally capable of handling whatever life throws at us, good or bad. There is this common kind of feeling, actually, if we can go through what we've been through, then we can pretty much tackle anything.
Oh yeah.
And the life of a freelance illustrator is by no means easy.
No, it's not. But I think again, it's like going back to just like transparency with other people that are doing this, and just being like, I think it's so easy to get wrapped up in like social media and see the projects that people are posting and think like, this person's killing it, there's no way they're struggling in their career. And it's like, actually that job that you think probably paid a ton of money paid jack shit. And you're just like you're just like trying to post as much as possible. So just remembering that like the perception that people have is not always reality. And so like find your people that are going through it with you to keep you grounded in reality, but also hopeful that like life just also comes in seasons.
It really does. Well, that is a lot of wisdom to share on this lovely Monday morning. I really appreciate you chatting with us on Creative Boom. And
thank you for having
congratulations for being, well, pleasure. And congratulations on being a freelancer for a whole entire year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Here's to another year, hopefully.
Absolutely. Happy 2023.
Let's go.
Thanks so much, Meredith.
Yeah, it was so much fun. I really appreciate that.
To discover more about Meredith Schomburg, visit our show notes at creativeboom.com/podcast. That's where you can also hit subscribe and see our entire archive of episodes so far.